Hey everybody, it's Matt here, and it has been a while since we've done a playing guide. So if you're not familiar with these, usually I get a few people on the channel, and as well as myself, and we talk about some games that either we played as kids or we played fairly recently. But the point is that this is not an all-time definitive list of amazing and great games. This is not the only list you should ever look at for games that we recommend for you to play, and this is not particularly about buying the games, how expensive they are. It's just a guide about games that we recommend that you should play. So we'll get to me towards the end of the video, so let's jump to our first person right now.
Yeah, so the N64 games that I would recommend playing. The first, Paper Mario. Now, unlike most people, or unlike a lot of people I've talked to, I didn't have an N64 when it first came out. I did not get one until 2017. So I was a bit behind the curve.
Is there anyone who might have hooked you up with one?
Right, yeah, you did. You actually did. I believe you found one on eBay, and you were like, "Hey, do you want this?" And I was like, "Yes!" And thus the journey began. But the first Paper Mario is one of the first games I picked up for it. I love Thousand Year Door on the GameCube, so I wanted to go back and play the first one, and it definitely did not disappoint. I think it was actually even one of, if not the last games to come out on the N64. But it really holds up. And it had all the charm and fun that I remember out of the second one. So it's definitely worth it to go back and play it. The first Star Wars Rogue Squadron, which again, I played Rogue Squadron 2 and 3 on the GameCube, wanted to come back and play the original Rogue Squadron. It's funny, Matt, you actually got me a copy off of eBay one day with some cool stickers and the box, which I have on my bookshelf. But and again, it definitely holds up on the N64. A lot of the missions feel like there were more missions and they were a little more simplistic with what they wanted you to do in each level, whereas later games had fewer missions but more stuff to do in them. But they definitely had some nice moments. It almost felt like some of the events from the game would be like in an expanded universe book. Like there's a whole section where you fight, a Moff that even Luke hadn't heard about. And he's like, who the hell is that? It's like, well, apparently he's a big deal because he's pissed off at us for destroying his factories. And I thought it was a cool little thing they added in. Star Fox 64, which I just got recently. And I've played bits and pieces before. And the funny thing with Star Fox is that however you want to look at it, whether Rogue Squadron plays like Star Fox or Star Fox plays like Rogue Squadron, probably the first. But so it's funny that I never really got into Star Fox as a kid. But as I've gotten older, I realized, wow, these Star Fox games are a lot like the Rogue Squadron games. I would probably love them. I've played like bits and pieces here and there, so I finally wanted to pick up. When I got the N64, I was like, okay, Star Fox 64 is definitely something on my list that I need to get, and I finally found it again. So that's cool, and I definitely want to play through that. I've played through the first one on the SNES, but yeah, and I enjoyed that, so I'm definitely looking forward to 64. And last one on my list would be Pokemon Snap. Still looking to get a copy, but I have a lot of fond memories of Snap with another co-host of ours, Anthony. Me and him used to stay up all night at like sleepovers in like elementary school and middle school, playing Pokemon Snap, trying to like complete it, trying to figure out what to do. And that was a little bit before like game guides or like game facts was like really gaining steam. So we were like trying to think of like, oh, like what can we do? We have to look up a guide. He's like, I can't find one. So we were two middle school kids, two elementary school kids trying to figure out how to get all of the Pokemon to appear and unlock the secrets. And we got a few of them. Like we understood where the secrets were. We just didn't know what the game wanted us to do to unlock them. So it got frustrating at times, but like I couldn't put it down. I'm like, no, I gotta try it again. So yeah, I definitely recommend it. It's nice, just easy going through it, taking pictures of Pokemon out in the natural habitat. It's fun.
Hey guys, here are my recommendations. I'd like to start out with two honorable mentions, Pokemon Snap and also Paper Mario. Um, Pokemon Snap, I played with Tristan. When we used to have sleepovers late into the night. He'll explain all this probably. And Paper Mario is my favorite game for the Nintendo 64, but Tristan stole it. But I love it so much. I'm sorry. It's a great Mario RPG. Um, and I love the partners, and the story and the characters were fun. There was lots of crazy, like, wacky worlds that kind of were derivative from the traditional, Mario aesthetic. The first game that I recommend is Pokemon Stadium 2. The Pokemon Stadium games, 1 and 2, both games are great fighting games for the Nintendo 64. What I really liked about it was the first time you really saw the Pokemon actually being animated in a fight, because you had the Game Boy versions where it was I mean, the Game Boy versions were great, but they were limited in the graphics. But you actually saw the Pokemon fight, and all of the mini games. Well, some of the mini games were tricky, to be honest, but the tournaments were great. The tournaments were fun. So yeah, Pokemon Stadium 2 is a staple game in my childhood. I remember playing through Yoshi's Story, and I loved it. The game is really simple. You're Yoshi, obviously, and you have your pick of Yoshis, and you go around and you eat fruit. And the level ended when you ate the amount of fruit that you had to. Like, you had to eat a required amount of fruit for the level. And then when you ate that fruit, the level was ended. And so there was lots of enemies like the Shy Guys and the things like that you stomped on, and it was really fun. And then you fought Bowser Jr. at the end, I believe, or I don't know if he was called Baby Bowser or Bowser Jr. in that particular game, but it was really fun, the different worlds. So Yoshi's Story is my second recommendation. And my third recommendation is Mario Kart 64. So, Mario Kart 64 had a certain feel about it that the other Mario games kind of didn't do. Like, I personally feel like each Mario Kart game, even though it's still a Mario racing game, it still has its own feel to it. My favorite race course in Mario 64 was the Choco Mountain, and I just really loved the scenery. For some reason, I really liked Nintendo 64 scenery and graphics, because it wasn't too in depth, but it was still beautiful. And I remember having a great time with the race courses in Mario Kart 64. So Mario Kart 64 would be the third and last game I recommend.
So for the Nintendo 64, one of my picks would be Star Wars: Shadows of the Empire, and first and foremost because I was and still am a huge Star Wars fanboy, so that was reason enough. But it was really awesome. The novel that it was based on is one of my favorite Star Wars novels to this day, and it was cool to see it, to see it brought to life, because it's a whole multimedia thing. It was a book, it was a video game, there was a soundtrack. And the first level was the Battle of Hoth, which you really can't go wrong with that, because you got to do everything that they got to do in the movies. You got to tie up the Imperial Walker's legs with the snow speeder tow cable, and really there was just a lot of cool things for a Star Wars fan. It had a nice recreation of Echo Base, a lot of cool areas from the book were brought to life. Some areas that weren't in the book but were in Star Wars lore were there. So really, as a fanboy, it was a lot of fun. And it wasn't a long game. You could get through pretty quickly. It had nice little challenge points and things you could find in each of the levels. So overall, I said that was a pretty cool. It was a pretty cool game. Used some music from the original trilogy. Used some music from the great Joel McNeely soundtrack for the book. And yes, there was a soundtrack for the book. It was that cool. And so overall, definitely a favorite. That was the one that I got first. My next pick would be probably, arguably, I would say one of the most popular games for the system is GoldenEye. That to this day is the gold standard for FPSs. I'm not a huge FPS kind of guy, but I was hooked on GoldenEye. I said the multiplayer was sublime. My friends and I would get together like every day after school to play it. And it was really just it was very pick up and play, but it was a lot really exciting. And it seemed like no two matches were exactly the same. There was a little bit of realism with being able to shoot through, different weapons could shoot through walls, and the recoil was different, things like that. So it was just a ton of fun. Lots of James Bond and jokes. And that really was actually what got me into James Bond as a series, was that, not even the movie, but that game. And I had a great amount of fun with it. And the story mode, the one player mode was cool, definitely, but really, I said the multiplayer just absolutely sold it. And to this day, I'll pick that over any other FPS that you've got. I'm all about the GoldenEye, which dovetails rather nicely into my next pick, which is Star Fox 64. That one, I said, other than GoldenEye, that was the other big multiplayer game that my friends and my cousins and I would play. And, it was cool because you could pick between the R-Wing, you could also pick the Landmaster, and then later on you could have, your characters could be running around on foot and shooting each other and things like that. So that was a lot of fun. It was, and I had played the original on Super Nintendo. I wasn't like a humongous fan, but I loved the voices, sort of the iconic voice acting that we still quote and refer to even today. The Rumble Pack was also a big deal to me because it was the first time that nowadays Rumble feature in controllers has basically come standard. I think ever since the DualShock on the PS1, that was the case. But back then it was a new thing. It was a big deal. And, it add a little bit of visceral sensation and realism to the game as well. So that's why that was a lot of, again, another fun game. Great single player mode. The trophies were cool. Not trophies, I think they call them medals. But yeah, essentially where your kill count would be at max. You would have destroyed every item, every enemy in the level. And then, like I said, my friend would get us all the medals because he had a sharper eye than most of us. The last one, I said probably one of the more popular, if not the most popular game for the system, was a little game called Zelda Ocarina of Time. That one, like I said, strong contender for my favorite Zelda game, with Link to the Past being the other one. And it was probably the most immersive game that I had played at that time. You could run around and explore Hyrule. Day and night would pass. Just like in not just like in real life, but there would be day, there would be night. Things would be different at night than during the day, and there was really just a sense of being there and a sense of exploring, which again is kind of like standard in games these days. But back then, this is long before Skyrim or anything like that. So there, immersion, that level of immersion was still fairly new. Loved the story, loved the music, loved how all the different temples, whereas in past Zelda games, all the dungeons were kind of like the same. The layout was different, and the enemies might be, were different, of course, and things like that. But you kind of got the sense that they were a little bit cut and paste. But with Ocarina of Time, each dungeon had its own music, its own atmosphere, its own theme. And they all felt different, and they all felt unique, which added a lot to it, in my opinion. And also the other thing was that you could kind of tell what each dungeon originally was, where instead of it just being this labyrinth that has monsters in it, and really it's ostensibly was only built to kill adventurers, you could tell what the different dungeons in Ocarina of Time were in their day. The Forest Temple was kind of like it looks like an overgrown manor. The Fire Temple looked like some kind of prison. The Shadow Temple, I don't think we want to know. It was something cross between catacombs and an execution place. But again, so really just a very vibrant, very colorful world. Really like just a ton of charm. The music was unforgettable. And honestly, that's saying a lot for a Zelda game, because like I said, that's kind of what we've come to expect from from Zelda games at this point. So it was, again, great experience. We'll never forget first walking out into Hyrule Field and the music swells up and the sky is all around you. So again, probably my favorite N64 game and definitely one of my favorite Zelda games of all time.
So before we talk about my recommendations, I want to give you a few tips and pointers. So if you want to get into N64 playing and you want to play them on the original hardware, well, that might be a little pricey. I would suggest potentially not doing that, potentially getting something called an EverDrive if you are going to do that, which is if you can get an EverDrive, you can basically load games onto an SD card and play them on the console itself. It is 100% legit if you back up the games yourself, and if you don't do that, well then just don't tell me. But seriously though, the point is that you are using the actual console itself, so it is not emulation, and you can even play certain hacks on it, but I would suggest not doing that because for the most part, hacks are probably going to expand the ROM, essentially making it unplayable on original hardware, but you can play certain video game hacks for the N64 and also certain fan translations as well, which is also pretty cool. So if you're going to go to original hardware, there are many different iterations, some more expensive than others, but what's important is that you get either an original controller, or if not, you at the very least get something from, let's say, Brawler 64. I'll do a review on that over at our Game Time channel. It might actually already be out by the time this video is out, but the point is that don't go for cheap third-party alternatives. Usually when it comes to the analog stick, it ends up breaking off easily, and then you're kind of screwed. So I would suggest going with either an original controller or with something like the Brawler 64, which is, as you can see just by looking at it while I'm talking about it, it's very different compared to the original controller. You're not getting that original experience if that's what you're looking for, but I do enjoy it personally, and so I would suggest going that route. When it comes to this little hole right here, it's actually where you put your jumper pack. You got to make sure that it's in there if you're buying one secondhand. You really have to make sure it's in there because otherwise you can't play any games, and there actually are certain jumper packs, you'll see them on screen right now. Thankfully you can buy these through third-party sellers that allow you to actually play Donkey Kong 64, Perfect Dark, and there'll be a list of games as I'm talking about them right now on screen. It is very important that you get this specific jumper pack because otherwise certain games won't work. Like Donkey Kong 64 will not work. You can see from my original copy right here, the actual pack came with it. So they literally had to make sure that the pack came with it. Otherwise, the game just wasn't playable past a certain point. Something pretty cool though is that when it comes to the hookups, the actual AV cables are the exact same on the SNES and on the GameCube, meaning that if you have an SNES or a GameCube with original AV cables, the red, white, and yellow, they will work on an N64. Don't get any cheap upscalers like this one, they will suck. However, there are other third-party upscalers by Hyperkin that I have that, again, I'll do a separate review over at our Game Time channel, but I'll just tell you right now, just a little quick mini review, I like it. I think that it works really well. It is not comparable to either. There are HDMI mods where you can literally mod the board on the N64. However, those are around $400. Even buying the kit itself and trying to solder it yourself, which I would not recommend doing if you don't know how to solder, so that's why I didn't do that, they are over $150 just for the soldering kit. So overall, that's how you get the best experience if you want to hook it up to an HDMI TV, especially if you do not have AV plugins in the back and you need HDMI. But I would definitely say that if you're on a budget, these $30 cables work better, or you can do something in between and get to this Eon gaming cable, which I do not have, so can't review that, because that is $150, and as far as I'm concerned, that also is pretty expensive, especially as it only works technically with the N64. But again, another great way to get some really good quality picture out of your original N64, but I would just say that honestly, just go with either the AV cables if possible, or with the $30 upscaler. And when it comes to the transfer pack, There are not that many games in the US that are compatible with it, but still enough that it's something that needs to be mentioned. So with the transfer pack, you can actually end up connecting to Game Boy and Game Boy Color games in certain unique ways. Certain games unlock new characters. When it comes to the Pokemon Stadium games, you're also able to play your Pokemon games on a larger television, which even though at the time they weren't as large as TVs nowadays, still was pretty cool to be able to do that because I didn't own anything for the Super Nintendo, any of the Super Game Boy stuff. So for me, that was an amazing way of being able to play my games on a larger screen. Does not work with bootlegs slash repros, so don't use any like Pokemon Green or anything like that on it, but if you're using an original cart, it will work, it will load, and you can easily play the game that you were just playing on your handheld on the big screen. So would highly recommend that. Transfer packs, sadly I haven't seen any third-party ones, which really does suck. There are, however, third-party memory cards, so some games do require to have a memory card, so thankfully you can end up getting those really cheap, actually, even from Amazon. But when it comes to the transfer pack, I would suggest that really, unless you're going for some Pokemon Stadium games, I would suggest potentially not getting that unless you really need it for those games, because overall, for the most part, they aren't really used. Mario Tennis does seem to use it, but I haven't really seen how that's used, and I know I haven't been able to test that out. But when it comes to some Japanese games, there's actually more stuff on the Japanese side that is compatible. So if you're someone that wants to collect US and Japanese games, then definitely look into that. And speaking of US and Japanese games, something very interesting to note, is that N64 does not have region locking, technically. So the cartridges are different shapes, but actually, if you just end up swapping the cartridges out, you can actually just play Japanese games on US systems. However, you can also remove the pins on the, or rather the tabs on the inside of the console. You can use pliers. I have not done that, and I would not suggest that you do that. Personally, I would just rather swap out cartridges when needed. I don't really usually need to do that, but still, it is a thing that you can do if you like. So, either way, let's get to some of my picks. So the first is going to be obvious, but still relevant nonetheless. It is Super Mario 64. So my little N64 story, just a little quick story time. I ended up getting the N64 really late into its life cycle, actually when the GameCube was already out. So I ended up getting, thankfully my mom was with me at a local GameStop, and we ended up getting the console with, it wasn't in the box or anything, but it was still relatively cheap. It was somewhere between 50 to 100 bucks with a bunch of games. I ended up getting the game separately, but overall it all totaled to about $100 or so. And I got a fair amount of games. So when it comes to Super Mario 64, it completely changed what I thought about gaming, because at the time I was playing Super Nintendo games, and to be fair, a little bit of the PlayStation 1. So when it came to Sony, I thought, wow, you have Crash Bandicoot doing what it's doing. I don't know if Nintendo could do something like that. And then when I saw Super Mario 64, my mind was blown. So when it came to this game, with the amount of depth that it has, I understand that maybe compared to gaming today might look a little bit dated, especially with its graphics, but at the time it was cutting edge. Even if the GameCube is out, for me that was cutting edge. Being able to play Mario not just with the original Super Mario on the SNES or Super Mario World 2 playing as Yoshi, but being able to take Mario in a 3D world, trying to save Princess Peach, and going through these plethora of different level designs and being able to go back into levels to get other stars. For me, it was a complete game changer, no pun intended, and I highly recommend it just because of how expansive it is. And even though I did enjoy the one on the DS at the time, I really do enjoy new controller, old controller, whatever way you play it. It's just very easy, in my opinion, to move around, to be an acrobat as Mario, and to be able to get some of those stars. So, highly recommend it, and there's a lot of secrets as well. Definitely a lot of things that make you want to come back and play yet again. Now, the next two games I recommend, Anthony recommended these as well, but I want to give a little shout out to, you probably could have guessed that I was going to talk about these, Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2. So, normally, if you ask me both as a kid and even now, I really wouldn't say that a game that has a bunch of mini games in it would be a good game. Now, WarioWare did change my opinion on this a little bit, but in general, I wouldn't really say that. I would think, mini games, come on. But being able to play these games with your friends, locally, couch co-op multiplayer was so much fun as a kid. Being able to take your favorite Pokemon and being able to play in these different cute little mini games on both Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2 was a heck of a lot of fun. And also, when it comes to the tournament modes, you were able to import your Pokemon from your Game Boy games and actually play them on the big screen. So not just playing the games on the big screen, which I found amazing, but also being able to play with your original Pokemon. Your Pokemon that you may have taken through the Hall of Fame, beaten the game with, and actually being able to play them on this console was amazing. Even though they didn't obviously look like your Pokemon, they looked like whatever models they had on screen, but still you would have your moves, and it would just be so cool to see, quote unquote, your Pokemon in 3D in front of you on screen. Now the next game is a fighting game that doesn't get a lot of love, and I understand why. It's a little weird, it's not the best fighting game on the N64, but I think it's unique and something you should definitely try out at the very least. It's called War Gods. Last I checked, it was not that expensive if you're interested in buying it, but in general though, it's just a weird, unique game that's very much like Mortal Kombat, but not Mortal Kombat, very much like Killer Instinct, but not. It's just a very strange mishmash of different character designs and models that you're trying to fight one another with, that it was just a game that as a kid really just confused me. Someone who was a fan of Killer Instinct on the SNES, this game just really threw me for a loop. I didn't really know how to feel about it, and even now while recommending it, I just think that it's a game that as you're looking at footage of this, it's just a time when weird, unique fighters like this could exist that were not based on any franchises. You could tell just by it being from Acclaim that, okay, it seems like maybe some staff perhaps from Mortal Kombat ended up working on this in some way or other, but it just really threw me for a loop back then, and it still does now in a way. Just looking at these weird different characters kind of come together in this unique fighting game that will probably never be released anywhere else again. We'll never get any kind of compilation, HD remaster, nothing like that, and that's kind of why I recommend checking this out. It's just, it's cheap, it's weird, and it's definitely something that you should play with some friends to pass the time. And the next game I'm recommending is one that I'm not saying is the best platformer of all time, but it's one that's definitely very unique, and I don't think we've seen something like it with that specific character released in this, to this day, really. So the character is Donkey Kong, and the game is Donkey Kong 64. Probably could have guessed that I would be recommending that game earlier, as I mentioned the jumper pack earlier. But the reason why, I really do mean it when I say that, I haven't really seen something like this from this character. We've seen other games that are very much like Donkey Kong Country come out, and I do enjoy that, as I really loved Donkey Kong Country as a kid. But when looking at this game in particular, is it as good as Super Mario 64? In my opinion, no. But being able to play as different members of the Donkey Kong family, just kind of DK crew, rolling around, just doing your thing, trying to take down K. Rool, I really enjoyed it for what it was. You have to get used to it. Again, don't go into this thinking that you're playing Super Mario 64. Each character has their own unique set of skills, but I do recommend it, just again as a unique piece of media that we will probably never see again. We've seen Super Mario 64 released in so many different ways on so many different platforms, but this game probably won't. So I don't believe it's very expensive right now if you're just trying to get the game. It does emulate very well if you're looking into that as well. So I would definitely recommend playing it, even though again I'm not saying it's the cream of the crop here, but it's definitely something that really stands out to me personally. Now the next game is one that you've probably heard about before. I don't think I'm going to be breaking any new ground here, but still something to mention just as well. Super Smash Brothers. So yes, this is not as great, let's say, as something like Melee or even Ultimate, but look, it was my first Super Smash Brothers. I highly recommend it. I think it's a fun game even to this day, especially to bust out with friends, but even if you're playing it alone, the little arcade / story mode that they have I think is a lot of fun, trying to find out how to unlock these other unique characters, some of the extra characters in the game. I think that they're fun, and it's something that I highly recommend. Also, something that should be mentioned as well are the other platforms that you can play these games on. So obviously emulation does exist. For the games that I've mentioned, emulation does work. However, for some games out there, even some games that you would think would be easy to emulate, that's definitely not the case. So something like Paper Mario actually has some emulation issues on the PC. Yes, even no matter how great of a graphics card you have, no matter how great your rig is, there will still be certain problems with emulation. The N64 was a bit difficult to emulate, but on the the Wii and Wii U, there is a virtual console. I'm sure you've heard of it. There were ways back in the day when those, well, the Wii U still is up, but when the Wii was up, to buy these games on the Wii and the Wii U. So I would recommend actually checking them out, even though the store isn't still up on the Wii. If you want to load them on, if they're compatible, I would suggest doing that for the Wii and buying them for $10 a pop on the Wii U. Now when it comes to the Switch, N64 was recently added to the online service, but I would say that unless you're splitting it with friends, it's not really something I would recommend at this time as the only way for you to play N64 games. I'm going to do a more in-depth review over at our Game Time channel and even maybe a little bit on our tutorial level channel, but overall, I would just suggest that it's a great supplementary way to play N64 games, but not the only way. Alright everybody, so that about wraps up this video, and if there are any picks that we didn't mention, please comment them down below. I would love to hear them. So, love you all, take care, and tune in next time. So, see ya!